For the last 4 episodes of the By Reason of Air Safety podcast has been building awareness of the long-term effects of the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 on today's industry and the resulting negative influence on aviation safety. In episode 17, this podcast focused on problems with January 8th, 2003 Air Midwest 5481 accident. Episode 18 focused on the Colgan 9446 accident, where regional airline industry operational control mixed with maintenance mishaps led to explainable safety problems that the NTSB chose to ignore. In episode 19, the Colgan 3407 accident again looked at a major air carrier to regional airline operational control issues, but also shone a light on NTSB derision concerning pilot training issues and congressional interference. In other words, the NTSB failed to answer simple questions again. Now, in episode 20, we're analyzing PSA 5342, and we're going to look at troubling responses to aviation tragedy, abuses of authority that hobble aviation safety in broad daylight. Those who understand what's happening to accident investigations know this ignorance can't continue. There's an old Russian fable where a scorpion asks a frog to carry it across the pond. "But you'll sting me," says the frog. Scorpion states, "But I would drown as well." So the frog agrees. Halfway across the pond, the scorpion stings the frog, and as they both go under, the frog cries, "You killed us both." "I apologize," replied the scorpion. "I'm a scorpion. It's in my nature." Someday, we'll finally come to realize that aviation safety is no longer developed by aviation professionals. It's subject to the grandstanding whims and fancies of self-important bureaucrats. Then we'll finally understand how little has been done over the decades to make us safer. It's frustrating to see NTSB board members use these accidents as a means to draw attention to themselves. Bureaucrats disrupt fact-finding, corrupt investigatory integrity. Why? Because it's in their nature. Hello, I'm Stephen Carbone, and this is By Reason of Air Safety. Of the 4 regional airline accidents we've looked at over these past 4 By Reason of Air Safety episodes, this one concerning PSA Flight 5342's collision with an Army helicopter stands out as being particularly loathsome. The NTSB resorted to its old playbook, quantity over quality. Aviation was not made safer. Ignorant politicians exploited the victims' families. These politicians took advantage of grieving families and used them to push agendas. And the only ones who benefited from this investigation were lobbyists and special interests. And to top it all off, the regional airline industry was yet again ignored. Those were specific incriminatory statements I just made. Incriminatory is as close as I can get to stating that the PSA 5342 accident investigation report, Air 2602, was nothing like an accident investigation report. On January 29, 2025, Pacific Southwest Airlines, PSA Flight 5342, a Bombardier CL600 2C10, collided with a U.S. Army Sikorsky UH-60L helicopter over the Potomac River while on approach to Ronald Reagan International Airport. The NTSB resorted to its old playbook, quantity, not quality. It's unclear why the NTSB believes that if you make a report or a probable cause this wordy, that industry will be impressed by the amount of words, but not the content. Perhaps the NTSB believes if there's a probable cause as big as a billboard, people would be so wowed by the complexity that went into saying Absolutely nothing. Or perhaps board members think quantity, not quality, makes them look smarter. I mean, look at this. It's like making one's way through War and Peace. The NTSB, the board, provided a probable cause that is 90 words long, 3 times as many words needed for a probable cause. In addition, NTSB board members generated 74 findings, 50 recommendations, and a ridiculous number of finger-pointing accusations that blames everybody but the board, who prided themselves on being concerned yet never acted proactively, never conducted a study into these dangers the board stated were so obvious that the board could blame others for its own short-sighted negligence. Aircraft had been landing at Reagan National Airport since 1941, when it opened as Washington National Airport. 84 years of aircraft flying into Washington National. So what was different the night of January 29th, 2025? An airliner on approach? Normal. ATC, air traffic control, ATC, aware of the airliner's approach? Normal. What then was different? What didn't belong near the approach path to an airport? An Army helicopter conducting night vision goggle training. The question becomes, why was an Army helicopter training mission with a side order of night vision goggles training, why was this helicopter mission conducted over a heavily populated area at night near the approach pattern to a popular airport? Training missions are, by definition, highly difficult, highly stressful, overloading missions. Why? Because it's about training. NTSB Accident Report Air 2602 stated on PDF page 22, paragraph 2, when it described the helicopter's presence is PAT 25. That was the call sign for them. PAT 25 originated from Davis Army Airfield, DAA, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, for the purpose of the pilot's annual standardization evaluation flight with the use of night vision goggles. So let's interpret that statement into government ease. Another name for an annual standardization flight is a training flight. The report described it as an evaluation flight. That means the trainee is requalifying on equipment they may not have flown on in months. They are being evaluated. For what? Perhaps more training, or lots more training. Perhaps the pilot had been assigned other duties for several months or was injured and was now returning to duty. Okay, that's parts normal. Either way, the flight was a high-stress flight for the trainee with someone evaluating the trainee's performance looking over their shoulder. Another term for the use of night vision goggles was training on night vision goggles. The trainee was receiving initial training on visual equipment they never used before, or not regularly, or not in a long time. So the trainee was learning to use night vision goggles and requalifying on a helicopter the trainee hadn't flown in months, in a heavy aircraft traffic area. Night vision goggles are an essential addition to law enforcement and emergency services like air medical persons. Medical helicopters flying into certain situations need the safety assistance of night vision. Law enforcement needs night vision for numerous reasons. These agencies need to practice how to use the goggles in civilian situations. What these agencies don't need to do is practice near the flight path of a major airport. So why would the military do so? Does the military need to practice with night vision goggles? Absolutely. Does the military need to practice with night vision goggles near, say, a major metropolitan area? Most definitely. It's not a question of the military not needing to learn or practice new technologies. The question is, and should have been, did a military trainee need to train on night vision goggles and requalify on military equipment near a major airport? Should a trainee weave in and out of traffic near, say, JFK or O'Hare? No. Then what made Reagan National okay? Don't student pilots have enough to focus on, including learning new optical equipment and requalifying on a helicopter they probably hadn't been on in months, maybe years, without having the entire area be saturated with traffic at night? And the NTSB knew this. How could the board not know this? They preferred to let industry think NTSB board members were oblivious to night vision goggle technologies, to military training near Reagan National, where they are based, where the NTSB is based, and how dangerous it was, while claiming to be an authority on all things aviation. But an agency like the board can't have it both ways. Either you are the authority or you're not. If the board didn't know about safety issues then, they don't deserve to investigate the aviation industry, because the board apparently doesn't know anything about the aviation industry. The board is not competent. It was who put a trainee in that place, in that position. That's who carries the weight of this accident. The trainee should have been sent to a military base for training. Why? Heck, why not? Where else could this training have taken place? Well, the military has numerous bases large enough to conduct initial helicopter training or evaluation training without endangering anyone. Military bases like Fort Dix up in Burlington County, New Jersey, offers 31,000 acres with zero civilian traffic, a controlled airspace, and dark areas for night vision goggles training. Why wasn't Fort Dix used? Where else could the helicopter training be accomplished out of harm's way? Well, this Fort Bliss, Texas has 1.12 million acres. Fort Bragg in North Carolina, 42,000 acres. Fort Hood, Texas has over 196,000 acres. Fort Benning in Georgia has over 182,000 acres. Fort Campbell, Kentucky has over 94,000 acres. Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington has over 86,000 acres. Fort Carlson, Colorado has over 124,000 acres. Fort Stewart, Georgia has over 271,000 acres. Fort Riley in Kansas has over 92,000 acres. And Fort Drum, New York has over 107,000 acres. I could go on, but the point is made. That's a lot of training area that was ignored. Why? And that's the $64,000 question. Why not train military aircraft at a military base where it could be properly controlled? And yet, NTS board members pushed a long laundry list of contributing causes, findings, and recommendations. Some the board was guilty of themselves, that distracted from safety, that broadsided the incredibly simple solution. Again, the NTSB missed the target. Instead of forming logical patterns of accident facts, the NTSB tied the disaster into a Gordian knot, a metaphor for an intractable problem that would eventually be undone with unexpected simplicity. PSA 5342 accident was a tragedy, unbelievably easy to avoid. The PSA 5342 accident was unbelievably easy to investigate. The PSA 5342 accident occurred under unbelievably straightforward circumstances. Why does the NTSB have to manufacture a maze when the path to improving safety is often a straight line? What makes this NTSB accident report just like so many others? Aviation was not made safer. The PSA 5342 accident report, Air 2602, made aviation less safe because it had built-in ignorance of the industry. We established the board knew about automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, also known as ADSB, before the PSA 5342 accident. We established that unless the board was living under a rock for the last decade, they should have known what ADSB does, what it was. However, the board chose not to look at ADSB until after 67 people were killed. Then the board was forced to acknowledge ADSB, and they made ADSB sound like some kind of super zoomy technological fix-all. On page 303 of NTSB Accident Report Air 2602, recommendation Alpha 26-31 stated, require all aircraft operating in airspace where automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, ADSB, out is required to also be equipped with ADSB in with a cockpit display of traffic information that is configured to provide alerting audible to the pilot and or flight crew. Doesn't ADSB sound cool? And you know what? ADSB has been around since 2010, and suddenly, just like that, the board just can't recommend getting an ADSB in every cockpit fast enough. If the board was been so knowledgeable about the latest and greatest technologies, like ADSB, that's been around for over a decade, why are they insisting ADSB is so critical now? Did they miss all the ADSB memos the FAA's put out for over the years ago? Haven't they been reading up on the latest technologies, because they're so well informed? No, the board didn't fix anything. They used the board's bully pulpit to project blame on everybody else. For what? For the board's own lack of safety vision. The board did not commit to studies into ADSB. The board didn't take time or effort to understand ADSB. Therefore, the board never even tried to make aviation safer. When the board doesn't know what to recommend, they always recommend technologies that should have taken the time to understand before the tragedy. After all, the board had 15 years or more to be proactive. The only ones who benefited from this investigation were lobbyists and special interests. ADSB is recommended by 100 out of 100 ADSB equipment manufacturers and their supplemental type certificate writers. Think about it. Who benefits the most out of the board demanding equipment in an aircraft other than the manufacturer of that equipment? Consider the money to be made if the board pushes industry to equip every single transport airliner with ADSB. There's money to be made off ADSB. There's also lots of money to be made off the supplemental type certificates, the STCs, to install and maintain ADSB in all those airliners. Have all technologies like ADSB made aviation safer? Technologies have made airlines more economical, more efficient. Technologies have saved airlines money. They brought air transport category aircraft from 3-man cockpits to 2-man cockpits, saved money. Transformed overseas travel from 4-engine aircraft to 2-engine aircraft, saved lots of money. Reduced weight on aircraft using composites, again, saved money. Extended range with more efficient engines and increased fuel capacity, saved money. And reduced drag with winglets and winglet alterations, again, saved money. But that wasn't my question. Have all technologies made aviation safer? Where are the studies on the technology's effect on pilot skills, on mechanic skills? We focus on the technologies that are successful while ignoring, to our own disadvantage, technologies that negatively affect skills, knowledge, and experience. Too much technology input, like how many alarms, alerts, oral warnings, and lights can plague pilots before they start to ignore the important signals? How much troubleshooting can the aircraft take over that doesn't negatively impact maintenance reliability or technician troubleshooting skills? More importantly, are we properly evaluating technologies before we mandate them? Are we eliminating technologies that don't work or create safety problems? Are we just requiring more technological toys that make things worse? And are we looking at the people who are recommending and pushing in the Congress to have these technologies, and why? Have technological advancements benefited aviation? Yes, but only when they are thought out, not when they're knee-jerk reactions to straightforward problems. Rushing to conclusions without facts makes safety worse than the original problem. Case in point, an example of NTSB ingenuity. After the ValueJet 592 accident, the board recommended adding technology in recommendation Alpha 97-56, which stated, expedite final rulemaking to require smoke detection and fire suppression systems for all Class D cargo compartments. The problem that led to the ValueJet 592 accident wasn't that oxygen generators were loaded in the cargo bay, but that hazardous materials were loaded in the cargo bay. You see, oxygen generators are only one type of hazardous material. If the NTSB addressed it hazardous materials instead of oxygen generators, the recommendation might have been effective because it would have addressed the right problem. However, the board didn't do what it was supposed to do. Industry should have told the NTSB to go back to the drawing board because the recommendation wouldn't work. The technology was pointless. And by focusing on oxygen generators, not hazardous materials, the NTSB's increased the technology mantra led to two incredibly disastrous safety mistakes. One, hazardous materials are not limited to oxygen generators. Installing smoke detectors and fire extinguishing systems would not protect the airplane from poisonous gases, explosive squibs, corrosives, flammable solids, or gases under pressure, which are all hazardous materials. And two, the NTSB didn't test their smoke detectors and extinguishing systems' ability to extinguish an oxygen generator fire. According to the NTSB recommendation, a halon extinguishing agent would have dispersed in the cargo bay to remove oxygen. However, ValueJet 592's cargo bay still had the ignition, the hot oxygen generator, and the fuel, the luggage, and the tires. And the oxygen generators would continue to supply the oxygen. So the theory that the smoke detector and extinguishing systems were going to work failed because nobody bothered to check. The industry spent millions of dollars installing useless fire suppression systems because the NTSB said installing a smoke detectors and extinguishing systems would prevent another ValueJet type accident. Well, so what? The NTSB got one wrong, right? And yet, National Air Cargo 102 wasn't about freight pallets moving in the airplane. It was a cargo floor failure because the operator didn't follow its own weight and balance procedures. NTSB missed that one. Air Midwest 5481, it wasn't the elevator rigging problems, it was the airline's center of gravity being too far aft because Air Midwest didn't follow weight and balance procedures. They missed that one. Colgan 3407, it wasn't the captain's mistakes, but Colgan's pilot training failures. The NTSB missed that one. Emory 17, it wasn't the repair station's failure, but Emory's failure to record maintenance performed and inspectors not doing their jobs. NTSB missed that one. Mohawk Flight 40, it wasn't a failure of the pitch control system, but a fire in the empennage. The previous flight crew misreported the fire. Again, the NTSB missed that one. I could go on. There's dozens of aircraft accident reports that the NTSB missed the target on. So the list goes on. The NTSB got the cause wrong again and again and again. And then the NTSB distracted from safety improvements that were lost in the confusion of things like ValueJet's fire and extinguishing system. So what's going on with what was once the most effective accident investigation agency in the world? A bunch of bureaucrats are pretending to be aviation experts. What do I mean? In the 1960s, Robert Young was an American actor. He played many television roles, including Marcus Welby, MD. You see, Robert Young wasn't a real doctor. He just played one in a 1970s medical drama. At the same time, Raymond Burr, another American actor, became famous for his role as Perry Mason, a defense lawyer. Again, Raymond Burr wasn't a real lawyer. He just played one in a television drama. The same type of drama is playing out in Washington, D.C. Actors are pretending to be transportation safety experts who can't even understand how their chauffeur starts the limo. NTSB board members pretend to know what they're talking about. NTSB board members pretend to take questions at accident press briefings, but then turn the mic over to someone who knows what's going on when the questions start getting hard. NTSB board members play havoc with accident hearings by making decisions that give them more camera time. And NTSB board members make engineering decisions that put people out of business, complicate the investigatory process by interfering in serious facts with their opinions. You see, NTSB board members aren't really safety investigators. NTSB board members are just actors who play investigators on the NTSB website. And America has been buying this nonsense for decades. The board has lost its mission. It has become a bureaucratic, heavy blame-generating machine. NTSB board members have hijacked the safety processes. Board members with no experience run the investigations. Board members treat press conferences like they're auditions for American Idol. Board members make decisions without experience or knowledge that can destroy an aviation engineering firm with decades of design experience. And board members make decisions based on emotional nonsense, not facts. NTSB board members make aviation, highway, rail, pipeline, marine, all transportation modes less safe every single day. The board should have conducted studies on technology's effects on aviation professionals years ago. The evidence would prove that too much technology is a bad thing. I mentioned before that the only ones who benefited from the PSA 5342 accident investigation were lobbyists and special interests. Though I demonstrated how this was true, it was cynical of me to say. After all, our politicians will tell you that Congress is always watching out for us. Politicians, both state and federal representatives, are elected to look out for their constituents' best interests. Or, that is the story we hear. But is it true? Ignorant politicians exploited families. These politicians took advantage of grieving families just like those families of Colgan 3407 and used the family's grief to sell agendas. Again, politicians got involved in areas of transportation under the guise of saving us. Instead, they put air transportation at great safety risk. Let me show you how the ADSB agenda was sold to the American people. 119th Congress jumped the gun. They underestimated the public's literacy. Furthermore, the U.S. Congress believed that the public would be dazzled by a lame acronym, such as the Rotor Act. It's clear the cleverest part of the Rotor Act is limited to the acronym itself, the Rotorcraft Operations, Transportation, and Oversight Act. I'd be interested to know how long it took for politicians without any aviation knowledge or experience to generate that acronym. But it revealed that Congress put more effort into the Rotor Act title than in writing the act itself. The Rotor Act did nothing to improve safety. It did nothing beyond exploiting the families for which Congress used to pass this pork bill. Bipartisan bills are the easiest bills to pass. Why? Because the act was being mistaken for doing good. Democrats and Republicans will jump into anything that gets them reelected, even if they don't understand what the Rotor Act does. It was sold as a cure for aircraft accidents everywhere. After all, it's called the Rotor Act, and it's got the aviation term rotor right in the title. How can anyone vote against something that has an aviation term in the title that a politician said will save thousands of lives every year? How do politicians know how many lives will be saved? Full transparency. Safety improvements are the goal of all investigations. However, like the previously mentioned ValueJet 592 recommendation, we don't need changes that increase political bank accounts. We need convincing arguments to make changes. I want evidence presented and understood by all involved about what to do with safety in mind, as well as how to implement the changes, not political babbling. And if someone says we have to fix this right now, no. Emotional arguments don't fix safety. That person hasn't been paying attention. That person is a safety problem. Now, is there proof Congress exploited the tragedy of others, namely families of PSA 5342's victims? To answer that, we'd have to look at how the Rotor Act came to be. ADSB equipment manufacturers will benefit financially from the Rotor Act. The Rotor Act was passed because emotions were high and easily exploitable. How did the Rotor Act come to be written in such a short period of time? Well, when a politician writes a bill, it isn't written overnight. It takes weeks, maybe months, to craft the language and the arguments to write an act like the Rotor Act. And the congressman or woman doesn't write the bill. Staffers do, which means even more people have access to information and data that are not supposed to have access to that information and data. They easily pass this data on to special interests and lobbyists. And when you've written for government upper echelons like I have, you know exactly how long a document takes between rewrites and more rewrites. To be clear, the NTSB is required to control accident information data. The information is kept from public and congressional eyes. It is also true that accident investigation group party members must sign promissory notes, ensuring that they will protect proprietary information. Accident party members don't have the authority to leak uncontrolled information to the media, or to the lobbyists, or to special interests. It's unethical and can even be criminal. Beyond that, first, there aren't any Congress members who are aviation professionals or experts. Congress members are 100% dependent on all information that comes from the NTSB accident investigation for making decisions to pass laws. I'll say that again. They are 100% dependent on all information that comes from the NTSB accident investigation and the hearing for making decisions to pass laws. Step 2. The NTSB is held accountable for all information from the accident will not get out. There were no other sources of PSA 5342 information for Congress people to pull from. 3. Until the NTSB's PSA 5342 hearing had concluded on August 1st, 2025, evidence should never have been analyzed by outside sources, including ADSB manufacturers. Indeed, previously unseen evidence should not have been provided to anyone. Furthermore, no decisions on PSA 5342 accident results could be made without full and competent evidence from the NTSB hearing that ended on August 1st, 2025. 4. To do otherwise would be unethical, possibly illegal, for 2 reasons. A. Tampering with PSA 5342's evidence by congresspersons and their staff members during the evidence gathering phase of the accident investigation would alter the outcome of the investigation and harm companies and airline personnel. And B, also an equally unethical practice of offering lobbyists and special interests contract opportunities or inside trading information by Congress members would result in congresspersons picking winners in any hidden back office deals with manufacturers of equipment such as ADSB equipment without taking into consideration the safety involved. So was there evidence that any of these unethical activities took place? When we look at the Rotor Act's introduction date on the website congress.gov and compare that date against the NTSB's calendar for the PSA 5342 hearing, we find the congressional bill was introduced the day before the evidentiary hearing even started. How is that possible? Does anyone believe there's even one congressperson who knows anything about aviation technology? Does anyone believe Congress people can explain what ADSB is, namely automatic dependent surveillance broadcast? Does anybody believe that Congress people can even spell ADSB? Remember what I said before about how long it takes to write a bill. It takes weeks and months. It was clearly stated in congress.gov that the Rotor Act was introduced on July 29th, 2025, the day before the NTSB PSA 5342 evidentiary hearing even started. So how did Congress and their interns get access to a closed investigation? How did Congress, without any analysis of accident information, determine what to write into the Rotor Act that was obviously written weeks before the hearing? How is it known if Congress didn't pick their winners for the inevitable law to place ADSB in all airliners? And who verified that the ADSB in improvements would work to solve the safety problem? And before anyone blames this on any one party, equal members of both parties signed on to co-sponsor the Rotor Act, which means just as many Republicans and Democrats either pencil whipped this bill or they were each aware of the congressional abuse going on. And I want to be absolutely clear on this point. Our congressional representatives created a bill out of whole cloth. No facts, no research, no testimony, nothing. To make matters worse, our congressional representatives may have used facts and research from entities that benefited financially from the ADSB technologies that the Rotor Act required to be used. Government politicians coming up with aviation safety improvements are like a 21st century teenager learning how to use a rotary phone. A politician comprehending ADSB technology is like that same teenager knowing what a dial tone is. In other words, politicians have no idea what laws they're passing. They are fundamentally dependent on lobbyists and special interests for their information, for things like the Rotor Act. In addition, the board blamed other agencies, such as the FAA, for not incorporating ADSB in when the board has had decades of opportunities to recommend ADSB to prevent the PSA 5342 and other accidents. Instead, the board has squandered chances to make aviation safe and living up to its mandate under Title 49 CFR Section 831.4, which reads, to issue safety recommendations to prevent or mitigate the effects of a similar accident. So let's return to the topic of regional airlines. In episodes 17, 18, and 19, it was made clear regional airlines do not make much money. The regional airlines are fully dependent on the mainline airline. In the case of PSA, that's American Airlines. PSA and other regional airlines can't pay their pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, competitive wages. Regional airlines are financially strapped. But now, the regional airlines will be required to install unproven equipment on all their fleets. And when I say unproven equipment, we don't know if it will make things safer because the NTSB only recommended it and Congress only pushed it. We don't know if it's going to make things better because they're not going to put it into a simulated test where the helicopter is going to collide with the aircraft. So question, which regional airlines can afford to install ADSB equipment fleet-wide? Answer, not one single regional airline can afford to install ADSB equipment on their entire fleet. And inexperienced NTSB board members helped ignorant politicians to financially strain the industry. Not just the airlines, by the way. With installing equipment that only benefit is it just sounds cool. The NTSB will push all regional airlines to install ADSB equipment in their fleet aircraft. Result, regional airlines will be hurt financially. Why? Because an investigative agency and its board members with no idea what they're doing wanted to push an agenda, and politicians with no aviation knowledge will help push that agenda. And safety will not be improved because the wrong corrective actions were followed. You see, it wasn't just that the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 was thrust upon industry without any preparation. It was also the bureaucrats and politicians' agendas would, throughout the last 4 decades, continue to decrease safety. This will conclude the 5 episodes of the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978's effects on aviation safety. I'm glad you were able to sit through this with me. Until next time, I am Stephen Carbone reminding you to tab. Think safe, act safe, be safe. God bless.